Next up, we have Gibson Biddle, it's a pleasure to welcome Gibson Biddle back to Jam. I gave a cracking talk in 2018, and there's the applause for you, Sravanti, so congratulations there. Yeah, Gibson was VP of Product at Netflix starting in 2005, becoming Chief Product Officer at Chegg in 2010. There's a bit of enjambment here. This is appreciation for Sravanti and a welcome for you, Gibson. Yeah, he now advises consumer tech companies. Gibson, thanks so much for joining us, and I'll let you get cracking on with your talk.
Hi, Ed. Thanks a lot for having me. Hello, Seb and Matilda in the background. Maybe I'll see you today if I'm lucky. So I'm here to talk about inventing the future, and like Sravanti, I want to acknowledge it's really hard. And so I really have 3 chapters to my talk today. The first is I'm going to talk about Mars, and then I'm going to talk about Netflix, and then I'm going to talk about your rocket ship. So on the Mars front, I just want you to imagine we're at the end of the day, some of you have a beer in hand, and you have a new job. And your new job is to colonize Mars. So I want you thinking about that for a minute and the challenge of that. And I want you to get into this future mindset, like, okay, what does it take to do that? And what I'd like you to do right now is to use Slido. So imagine this is your new job, and I want you to contemplate your future by answering this question. Right now, I'm holding up my phone to that QR code, and a link is magically popping up. And I'm guessing that Matilda and Seb are dropping a link into chat as well. But I'd love it if you guys could answer my question using Slido and let me know what about these things you consider to be the most challenging. And I'll do a little bit of Slido shaming. How many folks do we think we have online today, Ed?
I'd say we have at least 100.
Okay, so 100 peeps, pull out your phones, click on the link that Matilda and Seb dropped into the chat so I can hear from you. Because I'd really like to know on this, your first day of work, you know, what do you think is the greatest challenge in this? Ed, which way do you lean on this particular one? Which is hardest for you, Ed, in your estimation?
I was tempted by all 5, but I went for food, water, and oxygen.
Very good. And Matilda, are you out in the wings?
I'm here, yes. I would also say food, water, and oxygen.
Okay. And do any of these responses surprise you, Ed?
I'm impressed by how few people think the economics is going to be challenging.
Yeah, actually, you know, that was actually mine. And my thinking is if you can make the economics work, you can do the funding to solve all these other problems. But there is no right or wrong answer. But I just want you to be thinking about how incredibly hard that problem is to solve. So then the second thing that I'm going to put to you all is to make a guess about when the first human will land on Mars. I want to give a little sense of how far into the future you'll need to extend to engage in this problem. And I'm hoping we'll see a little bit of a word cloud. We'll see a little bit of consensus. But as I'm expecting, there's a huge diversity of thinking here. Ed, where do you land on that one?
I land on 2030.
Good. So my point here is this is a really gnarly, challenging problem. And there's a huge diversity of thinking about what are the challenges in colonizing Mars. And then the second is there's a huge diversity in thinking about when this is possible or feasible. And this is, you know, these are the challenges of inventing the future. And to do this, you somehow have to get everyone aligned against, you know, is this possible? And when might it be possible? And what are the problems that we really need to solve? And give some sense of sort of step-by-step order to solving them. All right, so I got a little bit of consensus. Actually, Elon Musk has said that he'll put a human on Mars in 2024. And if I made you guess about who's going to win, most would say yes. that it will be Elon, because he's figured out how to make the economics work. He's sending rockets into space, carrying other people's satellites and delivering stuff to the International Space Station. And he's actually got a fuzzy vision of how he's going to pull this off. So, and this is never over. So, most of my knowledge of Mars is based on watching The Martian. I'm sure, like most of you, this is that moment where Matt Damon, like, oh my God, I've got to grow 4 years of food on a planet that doesn't have soil. And, as he nicely says, I'm going to science the shit out of this, right? And my point here is that these questions, these challenges are never going to end. So as Ed pointed out in my intro, my sweet spot is I look for startups with a proof of concept that are ready to scale, and I help to scale them. And I've done that at multiple companies. Last two was Netflix, and the one after that is actually Chegg, a textbook rental and homework help company. And I've just noticed some patterns that inventing the future is largely about a series of decisions that people make about people, product, and business. And if you can think of these as three engines, the consumer science, you can see the engines on my one rocket to the right. These three engines are critical. So the first is consumer science, and that's the experimenting the shit out of stuff and getting data. And then the second is strategy, having a plan, having a long-term vision. And then both of these things are highly dependent on human judgment. I mean, think about Matt Damon's character. At the end of the day, he got enough things right to pull it off. And it's actually a culture of a company that sets the beliefs and values and skills and helps the organization to develop that judgment. Because consumer science and those experiments, that's just data. But having the ability to decide what to do or what not to do is really the critical thing in these long-term journeys. Now, why did I choose Mars? I just thought it was cool to, at beer time to talk about Mars. But inventing the future requires multi-stage rockets, each with multiple engines. And then you have to have this weird concept, a clear, fuzzy vision of the future to get there. And then you need a long-term strategy. And you have to have the ability to solve these unending series of problems. There's Matt Damon without food. And you're required constant experimentation. And then you need a culture of iconoclasts. You're trying to invent the future. If you want to know what I mean by iconoclast, parents with 14 and 15-year-olds in the house who are constantly challenging you, constantly questioning you, that's what I mean. My generation's not going to get to Mars, but yours will. And that's what I mean by iconoclast. Ed gave you my background. I just want to point out I started at Netflix in 2005 and then went to my next startup in 2010. But I do my best to keep up with what the company's up to. So now I want to talk about how some of these, how I learned some of these ideas from my experience at Netflix. So I want to start with the initial vision, if you will. The company was actually started in 1998. And it began as a DVD by mail company. They were just sending these discs back and forth in the mail. And when questioned and challenged about the long term, of getting to a digital world, the two co-founders said, hey, we'll be downloading in 2000, which was actually 7 years too soon. So predicting timing is incredibly hard, just like you had a range of answers on your Mars expedition. So I just have a very simple tool that I use quite often to establish a product vision, this clear and fuzzy vision. So the fuzzy vision that I had when I was at Netflix, I simply said we were going to get big on DVDs. So that was about establishing a beachhead where we were in people's homes with these DVDs going back and forth in the mail. And we were really waiting for the bandwidth of the internet to get fast enough and for having some way to get our hands on content. But that was going to be the next stage of this rocket, if you will, to lead streaming. And then once we were all digital, then we would go international. And the reason I call it the GLEE model is you can see the G, the L, and E. But this was the clear and fuzzy vision. It was a bit flexible. And I find this concept incredibly important. Here's a juicy quote. Every successful company rides the growth wave until it crests and falls. The secret is to create the next growth wave before the first one collapses. I'm always thinking about what's next. And those increments I gave you were sometimes 5 or 10 years. These are the stages of the rockets. And this juicy quote came from Jeff Kagan, who was covering Yahoo. Yahoo was a one-wave company. It failed to develop those subsequent waves behind it. So this is something I watch out for. The reason I use this model is I'm always encouraging product leaders to think about the long term. Think out 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 years, because in the long term, anything is possible. So let me show you how the story of Netflix really worked out. The first DVD by mail in '97. In 2007, the launch of streaming, it happened to be called Watch Instantly then. The word streaming didn't exist. And then 2015, out to 190 countries, all digital, amazing. And then I don't know how well it translates to the whole world, but the Emmys are for TV shows the way the Oscars are for movies. But it's just, think about, it's amazing that the company won 27 Emmys. This is for Schitt's Creek. I think it's just cool that the father and son team in this series are really father and son. Now that looked easy, but it's not. So inventing the future is truly messy and dirty and hard. So there it is, a company sending back and forth DVDs by mail. And then in the early days, it was, you'd pay $4 or $5. And this DVD that you chose would magically arrive in your home about 5 days later. And it cost $4 or $5, like it sucked. And the startup bet the company in around 2001 on a DVD subscription, an all-you-can-eat subscription, which you're all part of today. And then, as much as I gave you that fuzzy vision of how things were in order, we actually made a mistake. We were so keen on going international that we spent 1.5 years of effort to launch a DVD by mail service in the UK. And 1 week from launch, we said, this is stupid. It's just too hard to integrate DVD by mail systems into all the postal services all over the world. So 1 week before launch, we canceled it, moved back to the States. It was messy and dirty. We did launch downloading in 2007. And then Canada was our first streaming only launch. And then we experimented. We thought one of the big ideas was a more entertaining experience for folks that are visiting a website or their PlayStation would actually improve retention. And Max, I don't know if anybody out there has seen Max, but it was a real failure. And this is the way life goes. Now I'm guessing that almost everyone has watched House of Cards. And that was really the beginning of an original content era. And some Americans know what Quickster was. If you're launching a multi-stage rocket to Mars, you need to drop your booster rocket that got you, into space. And so Netflix decided to drop its DVD by mail service for everybody in the US. And they called it Quickster. Said, it's okay, you can go to Quickster for DVDs or streaming with Netflix. And that was a celebrated disaster. They just announced the plan and 800,000 customers quit. That quarter, the valuation of Netflix went from 40 billion to 10 billion, an epic disaster. And then House of Cards started the original content. It was killed around 2017 by one person in content. She had signed the deal and she chose to cancel a series that Netflix had put $500 million into. It was a 20-minute decision by her alone. It was based on the culture and the values and the value of inclusion, because Kevin Spacey had been implicated in sexual harassment of a 16-year-old boy. And then there's been some other experiments that I might highlight a little later. One is called Puss in Book, and another that most of you might be vaguely aware of is Bandersnatch. But this is the wild and twisting path of and this is really what inventing the future looks like. And at some point, it became clear and obvious that the fourth stage of the rocket for Netflix was original content. Now, the other thing that all of this was informed by was a product strategy. And when I'm forming product strategies, I'm always thinking about how do you delight customers in these hard to copy, margin enhancing ways. And margin is just a fancy way to say make money. And over time, these were the key strategies that managed to do all three of those things. the personalization, the idea was to make it easy to find movies that you'll love. And we learned there was real value of giving folks what they wanted instantly. And then over time, we built a hard to copy device ecosystem where you could watch anytime, anywhere. Anything with a screen that you buy today is magically pre-wired to let you watch Netflix. And then of course, we understood over time and through experimentation, original content was wicked important. So I've given you that multi-stage plan, and I've given you these high-level strategies. Think of these high-level strategies as the guidance system for the rocket, the thing that sits in the front capsule. It's persistent through that entire journey, whereas these rocket stages can end or begin. So I'm just going to put you in the mindset. I want you all for a minute to be the product leader at Netflix. And Netflix is kind of an idea factory. Like at any moment in time, you've got hundreds of ideas to sort through. And I'm going to take you back to a moment in time, 2005. And this is when the company is very much a DVD by mail company. And the company had a growing DVD selection. It was going from 50,000 DVDs you could choose from all the way up to 100,000. And the service cost $22 a month to get 3 DVDs that would sit on top of your TV that you could choose from. And then this company called Blockbuster launched something called Total Access. So they copied Netflix service, the DVD by mail, but they also said you could come into a store and you could do an instant swap of your DVDs. And just to orient you, at this point in time, every month, about 5% of our customers cancel. This was the most meaningful metric for product leaders, it's retention. For perspective, at startup, 10% of our customers canceled every month, and today it's about 2%. So there you have the situation. And by the way, the company's still not profitable. 7 or 8 years into its history and is unprofitable. So this is that moment. I've given you the multi-plan approach. I've given you the key strategies. I've given you the situation in the moment. And your job as a product leader is to choose 2 or 3 of these things that you think are the most important, given the situation I've placed you in. Now, this is not a high stakes decision, right? It's not life or death, but I want you to feel the moment where you're the product leader for the company and you're trying to figure out what's important and what's not. Where do you lean on this one, Ed? If you were the product leader, what are the 2 or 3 things that you might choose here? And by the way, if you didn't do it before, you just hold up your phone as though you're taking a photo, and the QR code will magically pop up a link. And Matilda, if you could drop the link into the chat again, that would be awesome. Okay, Ed, you're the product leader. What do you think?
I'm going to be investing in speeding up DVD by mail delivery. I'm going to chuck in social, because let's face it, you never know what to watch unless your friends recommend it. And I'm going to improve, it sounds a bit daft, but improve personalized merchandising.
Cool. Cool. And Matilda, you out there?
Yes, I'm here. I was just watching the chat.
Are you surprised by anything that you're seeing on the screen right now, Matilda?
Right now we have a majority of speed up DVD by mail delivery, 50%.
Yeah.
Launch 1 and 2 DVDs at a time. Yeah, I'm a bit surprised by speed up DVD by mail delivery.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep watching. I call this Slido shaming. I see 40 responses. Keep watching. This is low stakes. This is your opportunity to be the product leader at Netflix for 2 minutes. Anyways, I'll just give you the overview here. So everybody had great insight. The way to create value, the fastest and best, was to speed up the DVD by mail service. We went from 20 hubs in the country to 100, and recognize that had nothing to do with the website, but that was actually one of the key ways that we were able to create value for the company. And then you were spot on, Ed. We made a commitment in the long term to personalized merchandising. So we funded that consistently and persistently. And then, Ed, sadly, our experiment with friends and social was an epic failure. It did not work. And this is the hard part about consumer science. For a variety of reasons, social, there's really 2 things wrong. Ed, first, your friends have sucky movie tastes. And second, you don't want to reveal everything you watched last night. So that was a big surprise. I will say that we invested in improving our margins. So lowering the prices to get more growth, to launch the 1 and 2 DVDs at a time was wicked important. And we actually launched an ads and used DVD sales, mainly to fund profits. So this is tricky. This is messy and dirty. And by the way, we did launch during the DVD era an original content business, and it failed, right? There's a bunch of reasons why it failed in DVD. So just imagine how brave someone had to be to bring up the idea in 2012 and say, we should do original content, because it was an epic failure 4 or 5 years before. And that's one of those opportunities for the iconoclast. So here's what I'm hoping you'll learn from this exercise. At the core, Netflix is about driving value through selection, value, and then the next day delivery. These were things that we learned that were really the engine for the overall effort, if you will. And then we made a persistent, consistent, long-term bet on personalization because we thought it was going to be a hard-to-copy thing that would delight and help build the business. And just this model itself of delighting customers in hard-to-copy, margin-enhancing ways was learned by all of us. And then I'll just point out that margin is fuel. Margin profits project the rocket that fund everything in the future. For 2 years, we did ads and previously viewed disc sales. And then 2 years later, our core business was profitable enough that we could stop it. And then the last, consumer science is hard. Like, you guys all have perfect hindsight about what worked and what didn't. It's just freaking hard. You're experimenting like crazy, and it's this really challenging combination of art and science. So just have one more of these. I'm going to let you be the product leader again. And now it's 2007. You're the product leader for this watch instantly service. That's what it was called. A couple of years later, we finally called it streaming. And you've just launched, and 5% of your customers are watching at least 15 minutes a month. This happened to be the shortest TV episode. And we've launched with 300 streaming titles. Our customers called it steamy romance. You know, it's code for something else. It was their nice way of saying our stuff wasn't very good. And it was on a PC only. And for the cagey old vets out there, it was using Microsoft's Silverlight DRM, which was truly wonky. So here's the situation. Your job is to improve that metric. You're the product leader, and it's your job to figure out how to get your metric. 5% of members are streaming at least 15 minutes in a month to drive it up and to the right. And which of 2 or 3 of these projects would you focus on in order to make this happen? And that's the question I put to you. Let's see, Matilda, why don't we go with you first this time on the cold call? Can you handle it? Or Seb, are you out there?
Oops, sorry, I heard it. I'm back.
Yeah. What would you invest in on this list? 2 or 3 things to choose from, Matilda.
Probably personalization, and I would go with maybe binge watching.
Got it. Got it. And Ed, when you see this list, what are the 2 or 3 things that you choose to focus on?
I like the look of Stein Starts Game Changer, and I also binge watch
Got it. Okay, so we got lots of, so I'm going to tell you, so by the way, I just love that everybody's bought into the long-term value of personalization, because that continued, never faded. We were incredibly lucky. The Stars catalog, no one owned the digital rights to it, so we were able to sign that. A couple of surprises. We actually spent 1.5 years to launch our own Netflix hardware device, and a month from launch chose not to launch it. And I'll tell you why in a minute. We did get very quickly to the Mac, and then this will surprise folks. It was 5 years later before we got to the, your mobile devices, your tablets. It just, at the beginning, people were watching on the big screen. And then, yes, we did binge watching right away. That wasn't thoughtful. It wasn't purposeful. I describe it as a happy accident. But you get my point here that things are messy and dirty in real time. The reason that we chose not to, we had this what were we thinking moment and not launching a hardware device is our job was to become a streaming platform and not a hardware company. And then, yes, you got the memo on personalization. And then the real surprise is Netflix went from a company that was 80% movies and 20% TV to the flip. And it was because the rights to these big boxes, like 24, 8 seasons of 24 and an 8 DVD set, like nobody wanted to buy them. So all the folks were willing to give us the digital rights. It was like found money. It was like the coins that you find in a sofa. Big surprise. And then this is now when we had the first surprise hit in House of Cards. By the way, that was a 60-minute decision to make the initial $100 million investment. And then, yeah, binge watching was a happy accident. We were just trying to find any way that we could to create value. So I just want to give you a sense, like the airplane's flying along and the rocket ship's flying along. You've launched streaming, but you're really not sure of all the answers. And luckily, episodic TV came along and fueled a lot of our growth. And that's really what the experiment is. And that's why you have to be fuzzy in your fuzzy vision. You have to be fuzzy in your plans. So of course, the company did go on to international, launched everywhere but China and Syria, and North Korea. And then of course, original content was a huge next fourth step for the company with lots of amazing content and some wild experiments. Think of sort of unknown comedians that Netflix gives an hour to that have been very successful. Or, I'm sure some of my guilty pleasures or Ed guilty pleasures are shown here. And these are some of the big hits. And of course, failures. This was Chelsea Handler. This was a sort of an experiment in live TV that failed. It was a talk show, and then within an hour, it would be out in 40 different languages all around the world. Think of it as a bit of an experiment in live TV that failed. So here's the question I'm putting to you now. You have the multi-stage rocket, DVD, streaming, international, original content, and the big question is what's next? Because that's your job. Be more ambitious, then talk about that big vision and work relentlessly towards it, but always have a next step. So now I put it to you, the wisdom of crowds, your collective wisdom. What should be next for Netflix? What is Netflix's next big step? So we'll be building a word cloud here. And I'm super curious to see what folks think should be, gosh, the 6th step in Netflix's history. And I'm expecting to see a huge diversity of thinking out there. What are some of your ideas, Ed? You got some ideas for me, Ed?
I think Ed, we cannot hear him at the moment. So I'm going to do it.
What do you got, Matilda? What do you got?
Well, my brain is a bit fried at the end of the day. I'm going to admit I cannot really play the Netflix product leader. I'm seeing what's happening on Slido, though, and we have some interesting suggestions.
Yeah. What do you see? What do you see?
Sports, VR movies.
Yeah.
One, user-generated content as well. Immersive experiences. Sports is a big one. VR movies,
so this
sports.
is the big question. The spaceship has gone so far, and now you're trying to figure out, 5 or 10 years from now, what's going to be important. So I could see some locus around VR movies, around sports. I see a lot of interactive and immersive and interactive, which are all wonderful guesses. And it's pouring in, taking advantage of new technology. How will AR and VR change the content world? And this is the creative exploration. And the cool thing is Netflix is testing in small ways lots of these different ideas right now, because they don't know the answer to this question either. And that's where it comes back to the consumer science and experiment with a bunch of stuff and see what works. So I'm going to give you my hypothesis. My hypothesis is that Netflix is experimenting today with interactive stories, and that might be a big thing in 5 or 10 years. And some of you might have used Kimmy Schmidt, where at this moment you make a decision about making out or planning the wedding. It's got the potential to delight customers in hard to copy, margin enhancing ways. My guess is today about 1% of customers are watching at least an hour of this interactive content per month. And could you drive it up to 5, 10, 15, or 20 over the next 10 years? That's the question. It's wicked hard to copy. And, you know, if 20% folks use it 10 years from now, then you can actually improve retention just a little bit more. And, you know, Netflix is thinking it's competing for the, you know, they call them magic moments. You know, are you going to get on Instagram, or are you going to get on Fortnite, or are you going to get on Netflix? And this is one of the opportunities. And so the experimentation's been going on a while. They tested with kids and lots of successes with these really endearing things, and then went to adults for the first time with Bandersnatch and actually won an Emmy, and then recently came out with Kimmy Schmidt. So I just want to give you sort of a sense of how this really has been playing out. You see those 5 chapters over time, and you see the list of enduring core things that are really important to the rocket module, you know, the capsule up front. And then every year there's been successes, every 5-year period for that matter, and failures. And so Netflix has been experimenting with the interactive stuff in the year 4, or the stage 4 column, if you will. And you know, they continue to do it. So these are the little glimpses, and it wouldn't surprise me if there's experiments and some of the other things that folks pointed out, but they're driven to figure out what's next, and that's the key thing. And then this is level of investment. So think about in 2010, Netflix was investing 20% in DVDs, 30% in streaming, 40% in international, and only 10% in originals. Go forward 10 years, only a 5% investment in DVDs, a few Americans are doing it, 30% in streaming, 30% in international, and 30% in originals. And a little toe in the water with interactive with a 5% investment. And we'll see how it goes. So I want to bring things home for you now. I want you to think about your rocket ship. So the key thing for me is, at your company, do you have a strategy? Do you use the GLEE model to form a long-term vision? Do you have a multi-stage plan? And are you thoughtful about how much you invest at each stage? Are you always asking the question, how can we delight customers in hard to copy, margin enhancing ways? And do you have a team that's always saying, my hypothesis is? Do you have an idea factory that you put in to test? And this is where the fun happens, the consumer science, the getting data. And I call it customer obsession. How can we delight these customers? Do you have the resources for fast-paced experiment? Are you always thinking about how to make the core better, but at the same time trying to understand what that next step function innovation will be? And then finally, are you creating a culture with lots of talented people with great judgment? Is it clear what the behaviors and skills are required? Are you encouraging people to show intellectual curiosity and courage? And the acknowledgement is you need experts at different stages. I mean, Netflix no longer needs DVD by mail operations people, but they need movie and studio people. And then my last thing is, do you encourage the iconoclasts, the people who question, who challenge, who say that might have worked then, but it won't work now? Because what got us here won't get us there. And that is the role of iconoclasts in inventing the future. So there's just one more thing that's required in these journeys, just one simple idea, and that is patience. It takes a long time to invent the future. I've shared here the market cap of Netflix, a 20-year journey. 10 years in, it was only worth not even $1 billion, and today it's worth $240 billion. It takes a long time to bring together this combination of culture, consumer science, and then strategy and make it work. So with that, I introduce my guilty pleasure, Tiger King. Really say thank you to you all. And if you know me, this is that moment where I feel like I'm a street performer. I've been doing my thing and I'm passing the hat, but I'm not asking you for money. I would love, 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 love it if you would hold up your phone as though you're taking a photo, and a link will pop up for SurveyMonkey, and then answer the question on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 sucks and 10 is great. Any number you want. How likely would you be to recommend this talk to a friend or a colleague? And then this next question is, what's one thing that was good about the talk? And then the last is, what would make it better? This is my 584th survey response. This is my consumer science, if you will. I think Seb or Mathilde have dropped a link to the survey into the chat. And they're also dropping a link to the PDF for this presentation for you as well. And if you ever want to visit my baby website at gibsonbiddle.com, I put a link at the top of that site that's got the survey link, a PDF, and then a link to a series that I wrote on product strategy that will help you to understand the GLEE model better. With that, I truly say thank you during these strange and dark times. I think this is dark. And Mathilde, Seb, Ed, thanks so much for having me today. It's been fantastic. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my slides, if that is okay.
Is perfect.
Good. I'm still here.
And I'm just going to view your audience who are off Zoom here, Gibson. And so here they are. I'm going to unmute them, and so everybody, you can express your pleasure.
It's beer time. Go get a beer.
So hopefully you can hear that. Gives your that's your
fantastic. Thank you. And Mathilde, were you able to drop the link for the NPS survey into the chat? Because
yes.
that's
absolutely. Marta dropped
applause. That's really what I love. I love people's feedback because this is how I learn to do what I do. It's incredibly helpful. So thanks in advance for everybody's feedback.
Thank you. Everything is in the chat. So everyone, make sure that you give some feedback. And also if you want the slides or the presentation, you have it on his website.
Yeah, yeah.
That's some pretty serious virtual applause. So well done, Gibson. It's great to see that your methodology of being willing to test a hypothesis, gain feedback, and take risks applies also to the way you give talks.
Yeah.
And so next up at the conference, we have an event of like seminal importance, which is that we have arguably the world's greatest online dance DJ, which is called the Distributed Dance Party. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Distributed Dance Party before showing you how to find them. So the DDP have been going for 10 years.